I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
If you're an avid listener of the Business of Story, then you've often heard me encourage you to turn your stats into stories, your analytics into anecdotes, your data into drama, if you want to connect with your audiences and move them to action. But don't take my word for it. I'm bringing in a top authority today who has proven that storytelling skills are essential to success even in the most cerebral of pursuits, like scoring a perfect 2,400 on the SAT exam, which he did after scoring a little above average on his first try. Shaan Patel is the founder of Prep Expert SAT and ACT Preparation and winner of the Shark Tank deal with billionaire Mark Cuban. Shaan is also a best-selling author, received his MD from Yale and MBA from USC, and is currently a dermatology resident physician at Temple University. He'll share today how his approach to storytelling and training students' narrative techniques can help them ace college prep exams like he did by turning abstract information into concrete concepts, and how it was a story about his dad that won over Cuban and his fortune to invest in PrepExpert.com. There's an even greater bonus when you achieve top SAT and ACT scores, besides just the chest-pounding bragging rights and attracting your favorite colleges, is that you are now open to incredible academic scholarships, which help you overcome that insidious challenge of college debt. Shaan is here to help you learn how to excel through the stories you tell, not only on tests, but in life, right now on the Business of Story. Shaan, welcome to the Business of Story. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to share some stories with your listeners.
Well, when it comes to origin stories, you have perhaps one of the most unique origin stories I've heard in the 4 years of doing this show. So we're just going to launch right in, starting, I guess, with you growing up in a budget motel in Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's very flattering of you to say, because I know you've heard every story in the book. So for me to be able to bring something a little bit unique is quite flattering. So my story, like you said, really begins in the budget motel in Las Vegas. And I grew up there because my parents immigrated from India. They had about $70 in their pockets when they immigrated. And what brought them to Vegas was my dad actually couldn't practice as a pharmacist, as a foreign pharmacist in Chicago, where they initially had landed in America. So, they were working odd jobs from Burger King to call centers. And, my dad was a trained pharmacist in India. So when they found out that Nevada was allowing foreign pharmacist grads to practice pharmacy, they moved to Las Vegas. And, everyone kind of asked, why'd you move to Vegas? And it was literally because my dad could practice as a pharmacist. And so when he was building up as a pharmacist, he made the decision to, instead of buying a house, to buy a motel. And the reason for that is, a motel can continue to generate revenue, and rather than, a house that kind of eats up your existing resources.
So he was Airbnb-ing it before there was an Airbnb.
Exactly. Yeah, you could say it that way. And so, I grew up pretty much my entire childhood in a 2-bed, 1-bath living space that was attached to the front office of this little 23-room motel in Las Vegas. And, I know when people think of Vegas, they think of all of the glitz and glamour of the strip, but this is really the ghetto of Las Vegas, where there's a lot of drug addicts, prostitutes, police. And it was an interesting place for, a young Indian boy to grow up, and saw a lot of things that, kids with a traditional upbringing in the suburbs would not have been exposed to.
That's a very nice way of putting it. So, did it scare the hell out of you, or was it just normal? Was that just your normal?
It was my normal. I didn't really know anything better because...
Cue the sirens, by the way. I hear them in the background, which is perfect because I think it plays to the ethos of your neighborhood, it sounds like.
This is so normal for my neighborhood. When I was growing up in the motel, when we finally moved out of the motel when I was 18 years old or 17 years old, and we moved to the suburbs, I was struck at how quiet it was. There were no police sirens. There was no one yelling outside. And, and even now I live in the city, as you can tell, and there's police sirens, and that's what I'm comfortable with. But I used to be so embarrassed to share with people that I grew up in a motel because, as an 8-9-year-old kid, I never wanted to tell other kids at school that I was living in a motel, because it would start this huge line of questioning, like, why do you guys live in a motel, XYZ? And so I never invited kids from my school to sleepovers or hang out at my place. I would always go to their place. And so, so that's essentially where I grew up. And I think that's actually a big reason why I am an entrepreneur, is I grew up in that entrepreneurial motel. And my dad also, he's the hardest working person I saw growing up, where he would wake up at 5 a.m., go to work by 6 a.m. till 2 p.m. working as a pharmacist, then come to the motel and work from 3 to 7 p.m. and then go to the gas station he eventually bought a couple doors down and work from 8 to 10 p.m. So, people say that I work hard, but I don't work nearly as hard as my father. But I think that's where I get my work ethic from and that entrepreneurial drive.
So you had a great role model, but I would imagine the schools in your particular neighborhood maybe weren't the top of the class.
Yeah, exactly. So, Las Vegas actually is one of the worst school districts in the nation. And a lot of people don't know that. When you think of bad school districts, you might think of the South, and we actually kind of battle it out with Mississippi as to who's worse.
Well, in Arizona, I hate to say, we're right at the top of that heap as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. It's too bad. And a lot of it in Vegas, at least, is due to the fact that there are so many jobs at the casino that at 16, 17 years old, you can make $70,000 parking cars at ballet at the Bellagio. And, so that causes us to have a 40% dropout rate. And our schools aren't the best, but those are the ones that I went to. I went to urban public schools in Las Vegas, and I didn't know much about college admissions or scores, the SAT, the ACT. My parents didn't go to college here. And so I kind of had to learn a lot of it on my own. And the one thing that I knew is I wanted a high SAT score when I was in high school, because my parents valued education. I was always a straight A student. I realized very early on, if I just got A's, my parents would lay off my back. I could play video games and they wouldn't bother me. But if I got a B's and C's, like, I would really have to deal with all of the parental nagging that I didn't want to as a kid. And I just wanted to go to the motel pool, play video games, and act like a normal kid, play basketball. And so I just realized very early on, if I got A's, that would happen. And
was school easy for you?
I would say school, I'm not a natural genius in any sense of the word. I always worked really hard at whether it was at school or, when it came to the SAT, for example, my first SAT score was just a little bit above average. It was a 1760. Now, this is out of 2,400. And, average was 1,500. So I was a couple hundred points above average, but nowhere near a perfect score. I spent an entire summer in the library between my junior and senior year of high school prepping for the SAT. And, I was able to raise my SAT score from this average score to a perfect SAT score. And that totally changed my life. I mean, only 0.02% of all students get a perfect SAT score. And so I really stood out in Las Vegas because, like we said before, Vegas didn't have the best educational system. And so I will say that the one benefit of raising a child in Las Vegas or in Arizona or in Mississippi is if they do well, they can really stand out versus if you raise them in a more competitive area like the Bay Area in California or New Jersey, where there's, every student is an all-star, you may not get to stand out as much. So that perfect SAT score put me in all the local media publications. I got into amazing universities. I got $250,000 in college scholarships. I didn't have to pay a dime for tuition. And I even got to meet the president of the United States. A lot of people are like, oh, you met Obama. And no, I'm not that young. I met Bush, and so it was really life-changing for me. And that's when I, couldn't believe that this one SAT score could change my life so drastically. I wasn't paying a dime for tuition, books, food, housing, anything. Like it totally was like, this was a game changer for me. And so when I was in college, I decided I wanted to help other students improve their test scores the way that I did because it changed my life, And even now my company our motto is change your score, change your life at Prep Expert. And what I did was I thought, well, why don't I write a SAT prep book? It'll be the first book written by a perfect score student and publishers are going to love this. And, I didn't know the first thing about writing a book or, getting published. But what I did was I put together a book proposal. I pitched it out to 100 literary agents and publishers. And what was interesting is every single agent and publisher rejected my book proposal. They all said the SAT prep market is too competitive. They said that I didn't have a platform to write a book. One even said, I didn't find Shaan's writing particularly engaging. He's not a great writer. I mean, it was pretty hurtful. I got it rejected 100 times, and that's kind of when I decided to take my destiny into my own hands, which was I was going to take all the curriculum I'd written hundreds of pages, and I was going to just teach my own courses in my hometown of Las Vegas. And that's when, I barely got enough students to enroll in the first classes. I had like 18 kids in this small conference room in Las Vegas. But I took those 18 kids, and over the course of 6 weeks, I was able to improve their SAT scores 376 points on average. And so that was totally game changing and unheard of in the industry. I mean, I was taking kids who were starting in the 50th percentile and taking them to the 90th percentile, totally changing their college prospects, their scholarship offers, etc. And so what was really funny about that was while it was really hard to get students and parents to sign up for the first set of courses, I mean, I had parents knocking down the door for more courses. And so I started hiring other instructors. And that's really where my company, Prep Expert, was born. And that's what we do is SAT and ACT classes.
So, yeah, let me ask you. So you started in sort of a disadvantaged way of life in a lot of people's eyes, other than you were surrounded by good role models, it sounds like, with your family. What kept you, do you think, from falling into that story of, you're in one of the worst school districts, you're living in a motel, not a lot is going to be expected of me, so I'll just do what I'm going to do, which so many people fall into. What kept you from that?
Yeah, I did see others around me fall into that trap exactly. And, I think that what's so important is what you just said, which is your family. I think it was my family being sort of a traditional Indian cultural family. We stuck together so closely. Not only did my dad own the motel that we lived in, but then he also helped our aunt buy the motel across the street. So I had a big family. We actually had up to 12 family members living in the motel in this like 2-bedroom space. And then, we would take a couple other motel rooms, but we had like one living area. We had a huge family. And we all really value like the values of tolerance, the values of hard work, and the value most importantly was education at the end of the day. And I think that, a lot of people think that schools, and we've been talking a lot about that today, which is, schools are what educate children. I actually think it starts in the home and it starts with the family. And I think, all credit goes really to the family and the values that I was brought up with.
And you've got resiliency obviously baked in here because you went and did your first SAT and you said it was just what, just over 1700, a
Mhm.
little bit better than average, but still feeling pretty average. That then you put in the summer to get a perfect score,
Yeah,
only to write your curriculum and have 100 different editors, publishers say thanks, but no thanks. So what is it, do you think, about you or that our listeners can learn that you learned through this, embracing your grit and getting through these challenges?
absolutely. I think that nothing that I have ever done that has resulted in positive outcomes has ever gotten done without me putting in an incredible amount of time, effort, and energy. I talk about Malcolm Gladwell, who's one of my favorite authors of all time, and I like that. He actually basically writes all of his books through really riveting stories. But my favorite book is Outliers, and he talks about the 10,000 hours. I really believe that you have to put in hundreds, thousands, if not 10,000 hours to become a master at something. And you kind of said it, which was, I had incredible focus to put in that time, effort, and energy into everything I was doing. So, when I was studying for the SAT over that summer, I would go to the library at 8 a.m. and I wouldn't come back until 8 p.m. When I was writing my book, I would go to the library from 8 a.m. and I wouldn't come back to 8 p.m. When I was starting my business, I would go to the office at 8 a.m. and I wouldn't come back until 8 p.m. So I've had to put in an incredible amount of effort and energy at certain points in my life in order for good outcomes to happen. But it was worth it because then you can sort of scale back and, I'm not working 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day, but there are certain points that every author, every business person, every entrepreneur, every student needs to put in order to have that positive outcome.
Yeah. So then you move on to Shark Tank. Did you see that in your life in your early years?
That was the most amazing experience for both me and my business. I think Shark Tank is the most powerful marketing machine in the world. And it was interesting. So the way that I got on Shark Tank is I was basically just a big Shark Tank fan, just like everyone else. And this was back in 2015. I was sitting in business school and, I was watching a lot of Shark Tank. And one day it just sort of clicked in my mind. I thought, you know, I have a small business in Las Vegas that's growing and doubling in revenue every single year. This would be perfect to get on Shark Tank because A, we could get investment to scale the business to more cities than Vegas. We can expand it online. We'd be able to get in front of a lot of parents and students to tell them about our program. And so, a few days later, after I had the idea, I looked up how to apply for Shark Tank and I saw they were having auditions in New York City for Shark Tank. And I went to the audition in New York City. I took the train in. I was a couple hours away. I was going to business school in Connecticut. And I was, of course, late. And I was the last person in line, standing in line with like 500 people to give a 1 minute pitch to a casting call producer. And so I practiced that 1 minute pitch to tell my story succinctly in 1 minute to that casting call producer, probably over 20 or 30 hours just to perfect that 1 minute.
Do you remember it? Can you recall it?
I don't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but I do remember me talking about sort of what we had, our accolades. I tried to mention that, we were, have been doing $500,000 in revenue, that we've been in the New York Times, that we've been in Business Insider. I really tried to use like pull out all the stops so that we could get their attention. But what was interesting was the casting call producer's face was totally stone cold during my entire pitch. And I was like, this guy hates me, for the whole minute. And what was so interesting was that it wasn't until the very end of my pitch where I pulled out my book from behind me, my SAT prep book, that his eyes totally lit up. And he was so impressed that I was a published author, and I gave him the book. He saw my face on it. And, I mentioned that I didn't get the book deal, but what was funny is I ended up getting the book deal once McGraw-Hill, the world's largest education publisher, saw what I was doing with the Prep Expert courses, and they ended up giving me the book deal, and that was the book I showed him. But what's so funny is that I probably never would have made it onto Shark Tank if I didn't write that book, because the producer definitely didn't like my pitch. And so it was all because of the book. And
so it wasn't about your outcomes and what you had built and the people you were helping. It was simply came down to that little totem of a book that said you're legit in his mind.
I guess being a published author was a big deal to him, and that was really special for me to then, within a couple of weeks, I got a call to do another video audition, and then I got a call to do a phone audition. And within, I'd say 2 to 3 months after I auditioned for Shark Tank, I was being flown out to Los Angeles to pitch in front of the sharks. And that was a pretty intense and extremely, I would say, another moment in my life where I had to do lots of preparation. And what was funny is I kind of did the exact same thing that we're talking about with Shark Tank, which was I built stories to talk about before I went into the tank. I remember having like a storyboard up of at least 50 different stories that I could talk about related to questions that the sharks would throw at me. And the reason that I thought about that was, A, I have the most boring business of all time. I do SAT prep courses. And B, Shark Tank is an entertainment show at the end of the day. So I had to have interesting stories because not everyone that pitches on Shark Tank ends up airing on the show. It's only the interesting episodes, the entertaining episodes. And so that's really why I think my episode has done so well. It's been popular, and they chose it to, actually be televised. And it was because of stories. And that's so, so important to everyone out there.
And you built a library of 50 stories. So you just had them in your back pocket, depending on what questions might have been fired at you that you could then access depending on which one you thought would be the best answer.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I remember having a storyboard up of like, okay, here are my top 3 stories related to entrepreneurship. Here are my top 3 stories about growing up in Vegas. Here are my top 3 stories about growing up at the motel. Here are the top 3 stories about my parents. And so I would sort of pick and choose from those stories based on the questions that they would ask me, which stories I wanted to sort of dive into and dig into. And I felt like that is actually why Mark Cuban ended up investing in my business, because I remember at one point, and this didn't actually air on television, but at one point in the tank, Mark was totally uninterested. He like right when I walked in, he rolled his eyes and he was like not interested. But as I told more stories, I started talking about my dad and how hard he worked, etc. And then I saw Mark really start listening, and eventually Mark started telling me his own stories about his father and how his dad used to work in upholstery and work all day and was served as his role model. And we started to connect through stories. And so I don't think I actually would have made a deal with Mark Cuban on Shark Tank had it not been for all of that storyboarding prior to me going into the tank.
Did you have coaching on how to do that, or was it just kind of innate within you to think about pulling that together, those stories together?
No, I didn't have anyone coach me. I'm just such a big fan of the art of storytelling. And for me, I've always used the art of storytelling. It's ingrained in my business. I used to think that Prep Expert was not the best business because it is so attached to my personal story of improving my SAT score from average to perfect. And, I was like, oh, well, that's not that great because it's attached to one person's story. And, I want the company to be bigger than me and my story. But what I realized, I was like, oh, well, I wish I could be like Kaplan or Princeton Review that are faceless and kind of don't have a story. But for me, what I realized is parents, and especially the students, connect so well with my personal story of struggling with the SAT initially and then improving upon it. And then they connect so well with the strategies that we teach in the courses, because it's all based upon my personal story of raising my SAT score from average to perfect. And that connects so well that I've just been so used to using my own personal stories, whether it's for my business or for Shark Tank.
So in the SATs and the ACTs, whatever, you come across some pretty abstract concepts that can throw anybody. How do you use story, or do you use story in your training to help educate people on how to overcome that, or how to look at it and approach those abstract concepts a little bit differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the teaching methods that we have at Prep Expert that I developed was to teach every strategy through example. And examples are really our stories. When I talk about a strategy, we teach 100 different strategies that help me improve my SAT score and now help tens of thousands of other students improve their SAT and ACT scores. And so if I just tell a student a strategy, for example, avoid the passive voice, that's really abstract and they don't really know what that means. But if I tell them an example, like avoid the word being, and when I was in high school, with the word being, whenever it showed up, I would cross that out on every answer choice on the writing section immediately. They connect with it. They know that that is something very easy to do. It's simple, but it's not abstract like every other strategy or concept out there, like passive voice. What exactly is that? What do I need to define it, etc.? It gives them something to connect with about my own personal story of using it, and a simple rule, because we're teaching through examples and stories. And it's very, some people think it's too simple, actually, the way that I teach, but I think simplicity is absolutely key when it comes to teaching for these difficult tests.
Isn't that the hardest thing to do, though, is to make something simple?
Mm-hmm.
It's not as easy as it looks. In fact, it's quite difficult, so that people can actually consume it, digest it, and understand, get something from that. Take us to, if you would, Shaan, like one of the most arcane, bizarre concepts that you came across in this, and a story you shared that maybe it made you laugh, or maybe it's like a metaphor that you just didn't see coming but came together, that really helps your students understand that bizarre concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the stories I tell them is, when I was in high school, I used to struggle so much with the reading section because, for me, like I said, I was just a normal high school student and I didn't read that much in high school. I would spark notes things, and, I wasn't the best person about finishing all the novels the English teacher gave us and all of that. I would try to cut corners, etc. So I wasn't the best at the reading section. I really struggled with finishing reading passages on the SAT on time. And so what I tell students to do to get over this hump is, on the reading section, you want to treat it like a treasure hunt. And what I tell them is, when you're reading answer choices, treat it like a treasure hunt, because if you're reading answer choices on the reading section and you don't have an answer in mind prior to reading those answer choices, then you are shooting yourself in the foot. Why? Because this is sort of the thought process for a lot of kids on the reading section, including me, which is they'll read answer choice A and they'll say, oh, that's the answer. And then they'll read answer choice B and then they'll say, oh, well, actually, maybe that's the answer. And then they'll read answer choice C and then they'll say, oh, well, you know what, maybe that's the answer. And so, what ends up happening is they get really confused because they don't know what they're looking for. But if you treat it like a treasure hunt and you cover the answer choices and you think, okay, I'm looking for an answer choice that says, yes or no, or whatever your answer, whatever you think the answer should be to that question. If you write that down before you look at the answer choices, then you can just match your answer to which of the answer choices. But if it's like going on a treasure hunt, if you don't know what you're looking for prior to going on the treasure hunt, then you're going to pick up every coin. You're going to pick up the bronze coin, the silver coin, the gold coin, when you're really looking for a diamond. If you don't know what you're looking for, then you're going to get confused.
So you'll read through the question and then you will answer it in your mind before you look at the available answers. And from that, so you really, I guess, are typically arriving at the correct answer before you even look at your choices.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying? And then what they're essentially doing is confusing you, messing with you when they give you all those different choices that can throw you off the trail.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we call the strategy YPAD, or write your personal answer down. We write your personal answer down before you look at the answer choices, because they're trying to distract you, entice you, and get you away from your real treasure.
That sounds mean what they're doing to you out there.
Well, it is the SAT and ACT, the most feared standardized tests in the world.
Gosh, I took mine so long ago, I don't even remotely recall it. I know I passed it and I know it got me into my university of choice, so I just kind of left it behind. But this sounds like a very invaluable service that you provide.
It's so important, and schools don't do enough. I wish the schools would just teach it, but, I think education is sort of has it messed up in that they won't teach to the test. And that's why companies like mine exist, because schools refuse to teach to the test, and the SAT and the ACT will claim that, well, all you need are your regular math and English classes to do well on these tests. But, you know, I'm sure you've heard this from every student and parent that anyone has ever talked to, which is, my son or daughter is great at school, but they're a poor test taker. So
Yep.
it's like, that was me, that was my story. And that's why we need to teach to the test. And, everyone expects me to say, I think the SAT and the ACT are great exams because I own a test prep company. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I actually think the SAT and the ACT are horrible exams in terms of testing someone's intelligence or IQ. I don't think your SAT or ACT score tells you anything about how smart a person is. I think the only thing they show is how much that person prepared for the SAT or the ACT, and that's it. Unfortunately, they are very important to both college admissions, and for me, it's more important in helping students get scholarships to pay off college tuition, because it is so expensive, and I don't want students to go into so much debt trying to go to college.
So it really does. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that makes so much sense. It's not only to get you into your school of choice, but to get you scholarships so that you can study what you want and not come out just burdened down with debt.
Yeah, I mean, we had one student get $1.4 million in scholarship offers after he raised his SAT score. I mean, the return on investment on a course that's a few $100s, and you get $1.4 million in scholarship offers, it's really a no-brainer. And that's kind of the message I really want to tell parents is, this is not just about getting into college. This is about getting out of the national crisis of the $1.5 trillion in student debt, and not being one of those students that is contributing to that $1.5 trillion student debt national crisis that we have.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize that there are opportunities and ways. The story they are telling themselves is, "Oh my goodness, my child has gotten into this great school, and now we have got to pay for it somehow." What does Stanford, 75,000 a year, something like that?
Yeah, you have to be smart when you're choosing schools. I tell people, colleges, and especially these top colleges, are the ultimate luxury brand marketers, because they're selling education that is not that much different than a state school that's a lot cheaper. And they're charging, like you said.
Which is even expensive in its own right, too.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I could have gone to the Ivy League, or I chose instead to take a full tuition scholarship at the University of Southern California, because they gave me that full scholarship. It was no brainer. If I went to the Ivy League, I would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And so it made no sense for me to do that. And so, what I try to tell parents and students is try to reduce the tuition bill, and then try to pay it as much as you can if your student can get scholarships through their test scores and GPA.
Absolutely. In this journey that you've been on, that you went into perfect your own score. And I imagine your idea was maybe not even going in to get a perfect score. I mean, that would have been great. I mean, just as long as you increased your score. So I guess I would caution a person doesn't have to have a perfect score, but to increase it to the point that you're getting scholarship money is big time. What also has it taught you, or have you seen that maybe has surprised you from a parent and a student standpoint, from maybe the stories they were telling themselves going into the first round of SATs, coming into your program, and then exiting with higher scores? How can people reframe that story that says, gee, my kid's not a good enough test taker, to becoming a good test taker, or even that kid saying, gee, I'm just not smart enough?
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about in terms of, the SAT and the ACT, stop looking at them as measures of your intelligence or your child's intelligence or your student's intelligence. All they're measuring is if your student prepared or not. And so your student needs to spend that time preparing, because no one is naturally, or I should say 99% of people are not naturally good at standardized testing. Maybe your student is in that 1% category that is a natural born genius at the SAT or the ACT, but it's far and few between. And so I would reframe it as, this is like playing a sport. No one is automatically a star baseball player or a star basketball player or a star football player. They've spent years and years practicing, preparing, and it's the same thing with standardized testing. Is you have to put in dozens, if not hundreds sometimes, of hours preparing and practicing for these exams so that you become really good as well. And it's like we talked about before, the return on investment is phenomenal. There is no reason that a student should not, because if you qualify, like you said, it's not a perfect score. Even if you get 90th percentile and you get a national merit scholarship from the PSAT score, a lot of colleges, including like Arizona State University, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, USC, Boston University, there's dozens of universities that will give you automatic half tuition to full tuition scholarships that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm. What have you learned in creating your own curriculum on how to take a confusing and maybe boring SAT and ACT, and how you teach it that you could see would be very powerful within our school systems themselves? I mean, can they learn how to teach from how you teach the SAT and ACT?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's using the art of storytelling when it comes to teaching methodologies. A lot of subjects are just so dry, and teachers take no time to include stories, include examples. They just go from one concept to the next concept. They're abstract. They don't make it tangible. And so the thing that I've learned about teaching or creating these courses and books is that the examples are what sticks. The stories are what sticks. The concepts, they may or may not stick, but oftentimes it's not that important as long as they remember the examples and they're using those in their own testing when they go to take these exams.
And why is it? Why do you think stories and examples, anecdotes, events, described events are what stick in our mind? You're what now in residency? You're doctor of dermatology at Temple University.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what have you learned about the biology of us and our brains that make that stick?
I think storytelling is really as old as time itself. I mean, almost every religious text, from the Bible to the Quran to the Bhagavad Gita, is told in the form of stories. And, I think what makes them stick is that they can be exciting, they can be meaningful, they can be touching, and they really connect with us on an emotional level. And they allow us to relate better to each other and really connect with the sort of human existence. And so many valuable lessons can come out of stories. They can serve as entertainment. And in my case, they serve as education.
Have you read Noah Harari's book, Sapiens?
I have not. It is on my reading list, though.
Oh, it's fantastic. I've read it once. I'm going back through it again because there was so much great content in there. But I just revisited a chapter the other night, and he talks in it about, of course, we were all storytelling animals and apes. It's really what makes us, separates Homo sapiens from all other hominids, and how we have become the most aggressive, invasive species of all time is through our ability to create these imagined, shared realities, fictions, essentially, that then we, live into. And he was saying in the book that, the four primary categories of stories we would tell ourselves as hunter-gatherers was that of, first, botany. What mushroom will kill me and what mushroom will advance me and my tribe. So they had to understand botanically what was happening around them. Zoologically, what is going to eat me, like a lion, or what can I eat, a lamb. And so we would tell those stories to each other just to help educate, on survival. The next step was, geography. Where's the cliff? Where's the cavern? Where do I get lost in the forest? And where are the wells? Where are the lakes? Where are the clean streams? And then finally, there was a category of social, of I have to understand my tribe, who's arguing with who can I trust, who can I not trust, who might bury that, stone axe in the back of my head.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always based around survival and propagating, eating, moving forward. The very first, again, according to this book, Sapiens, written word was really caught in Samaria on tablets, and it was accountants. And it's when we became an agricultural society. And we started growing these, great acres of farms, and people had to then contribute their wheat and their barley and whatever they're growing to the greater good and the culture to pay their taxes. So the first written form, which people confused with story, were actually tablets by accountants, just keeping an accounting, of course, of what was being harvested.
Mm-hmm.
So data was confused as being our first storytelling things. Well, it, of course, wasn't until later India, Egypt, hieroglyphics, where stories actually started coming out, where they talked and wrote and captured the events that are happening around us. But in reading that, it just occurred to me that, man, we are so still data-driven in our education system and how we present, in business world. We learn by rote versus lore, like you're talking about. And we get trapped in this idea of, as executives and business people and academics and doctors and lawyers and everything else, of having to look and sound smart. And we can only do that through PowerPoints packed with charts, graphs, bullet points, data, whatever. When, just like you have learned in all of this, it ultimately comes down to stories, anecdotes, and examples that our Homo sapien brains, that have not changed appreciably, in the last 900,000 years, but we get confused thinking data is the story when it simply is not. It's the drama we're looking for.
Absolutely. I don't think storytelling is some old pastime that's no longer relevant. I think storytelling has become more important than ever today. I mean, when you think about, if you're applying to college or grad school, you need to tell a story in an application essay. When you apply for a job, you need to tell stories in your interview. When you pitch an idea or business, you need to tell a story to investors and customers. And even social media has made everyone a content creator, right? When you post a status on Facebook, you're telling a story. A tweet on Twitter, you're telling a short story. Photo on Instagram, you're telling a story. And, they even call Instagram, like those things now, the ones that are up for 24 hours, stories.
But they're not stories, though. I mean, that's the big misnomer on it. It's just a bunch more data, photos, and moving stuff bouncing off your limbic system, and our monkey brain is going, okay, that's cute, whatever, what's that? Nobody actually tells a set of problem solution 3-act story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't have that emotional connection, that powerful takeaway, to build up a real story. But I guess my point is that people are telling stories in all kinds of formats, and more than ever today.
Well, they're communicating or they're messaging in all kinds of formats, but I would push back and say they're actually not telling stories because they haven't taken the time or the energy to actually apply story structure to it. That, is the whole reason for my being, actually, is to promote that. And what you have done with your training courses and your own life, I just find is fascinating because, as you said, just try to get on Shark Tank. You showed up there with the data of, look at how impressive this program is we've created and everybody we've helped. And you had the stone-faced producer looking at you. It wasn't until you said, oh, and I'm published, oh, okay, so now there's a little bit more emotion caught into this thing. You go on stage, Mark Cuban's rolling his eyes until he hears the story. And then he connects your story of your dad with his story of his dad, which went a long way to get him to make that investment, not only just on, proofing it out through the numbers that you have a good business model and you have a heck of a great market that you're servicing, but he needed to connect with you to build that trust.
Yeah, it wasn't the numbers, the data, the accolades that got me the $250,000 investment from Mark Cuban. It was literally the stories.
Yeah. Do you get to work much with Mark? Do you see him? Do you guys chat much at all?
Yeah, so Mark is the best shark to work with. You get to have direct access to Mark. So we email updates weekly and he advises me accordingly. And then you also get access to his entire team, Mark Cuban companies, his business development team, accounting team, technology team. And what's really cool about working with Mark is he always says yes to the right things, meaning, a couple of weeks ago, we were filming an update for Prep Expert for Shark Tank. So he came down to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in my hometown to do a big event for the Shark Tank update. We co-wrote a book together actually for kids. It's called Kids Startup to help teach young kids how to become entrepreneurs. And that was a really cool thing to do with Mark. And he's just been such an avid supporter of me and the business. And I couldn't have asked for a better experience.
That's great. Well, Shaan, final question for you. What advice do you give to parents and their students, not only to get them prepped for college through your courses, but in the stories they tell themselves to find that right path to take, to really, really excel through the stories they tell in not only their academic career, but in their business career to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what really drove me was having a very specific goal and career in mind. And so I try to help parents and students, and especially the students, develop, what is their goal? What is their career? What is their purpose? For me, the reason I got a high SAT score was because I wanted to get into these direct medical programs. And, I am a physician, as you mentioned, and I'm a dermatology resident. And, I wanted to get in and I needed a high SAT score in order to get into these direct medical programs. They're very competitive. It wasn't like I was just studying for the SAT because I wanted a high SAT score. It's because I wanted to, A, get into the direct medical programs, B, I wanted to get scholarships to pay for it. And the SAT score was kind of just the gateway to that. And so what I tell students is, what is that university you want to go to? How many scholarships do you want to get? Do you want $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 in scholarships? Really tell me that number. What is that career? Do you want to be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, a technologist? Do you want to work in virtual reality? Like, what is that? Where's that program that you want to go to, et cetera? And really solidify that, make that concrete in a goal and make it tangible. Again, going away from the abstract, make it really tangible. And that will really serve to motivate you, not only to study for the SAT and ACT to get you to those goals, but also to continue succeeding in your educational life as well as your career.
So what's next for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Prep Expert is doing amazing, and I certainly can't take all the credit because, like we said, I'm also a physician and a dermatology resident. So we have a great team of 10 full-time employees and 20 other instructors who run the day-to-day operations of Prep Expert, and we're continuing to do great work with students on the SAT and the ACT. We just added college admissions consulting to help students get into the colleges of their dreams with lots of scholarships. And for me, I love to, I had that big question on Shark Tank, which is, do you want to be a doctor or do you want to be an entrepreneur? And I totally fumbled it on the show, but I won't fumble it here. I want to do both. I want to split my time between my clinic in dermatology because I love serving patients. And even, a doctor's visit, we didn't get as much time to talk about today, but that's a story. I'm listening to patient stories all day. When I'm writing my notes, I'm telling it in story format and I'm connecting on an emotional level with patients. So I love that. And then I love the entrepreneurial ventures because gives me a chance to share my story with the world in the larger format than a one-to-one patient interaction. And so I will split my time as both a dermatology physician as well as an entrepreneur.
Awesome. Shaan, where can people learn more about you and your prep course, the Prep Expert?
Yeah, absolutely. So parents listening to this can visit prepexpert.com to check out our online SAT and ACT courses. And if you want to learn more about my entrepreneurial tips and tricks, as well as, I have a chapter called The Art of Storytelling. Check out my book, Self-Made Success, 48 Secret Strategies to Live Happier, Healthier, and Wealthier.
That's great. And they can get those both at prepexpert.com.
Yeah, so the courses are at prepexpert.com. My book, Self-Made Success, is available on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. You've got to be probably one of the most busy guests I've had in a while, considering everything you've got on your plate. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here on Business of Story.
No, thanks so much. I was glad to share my story with you, Park, and your audience. I'm excited.
Thanks, Shaan, and thank you all for listening to this edition. If you've got a student in your life, or maybe it's a niece or nephew or a friend or family member or someone like that you believe can really benefit by getting their ACT poll together for both the SAT and the ACT test, send them to prepexpert.com and be sure to share this episode with them, because I think Shaan's insights about the power of story in your life, in not only how it helps guide you as a young man or woman out there through your career choice, through college and beyond, really, really powerful. So feel free to share this episode with someone you feel that can benefit from Shaan's wisdom. And of course, if I can be of service to you, visit me at businessofstory.com. Happy to be there for you. I guess I'm kind of the prep expert, but on the storytelling side. So if you are a leader of a purpose-driven brand and you would like to clarify your story, have a greater impact in the world, and actually simplify your life in the process, then please visit me at businessofstory.com. We're there to help you achieve your success and everything in your mind's eye on how you can have the impact in the world. And of course, join us next week when we'll have another amazing story artist right here on Business of Story for you. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.